Almost there. Okay, Archana, you can start.
Okay. So hi everyone. Good afternoon and welcome to all the panelists and attendees. My name is Archana Rao, and as you are aware, today's webinar is Sustainable Business, the Indian Carbon Credit Opportunity. So to all, let me introduce you to our esteemed panelists. We have Professor Sirajuddin Ahmed. He is the head of the Department of Environmental Sciences, Jamia Millia Islamia. We have Tarun Jami, CEO and founder of Green Jams. We have Mr. Girdhari Lal, project director and ease of doing business and investment promotion expert, EY India. Mr. Khaisar Ahmed, he is the CEO and founder of Decarbonics. Mr. Arjun Dutt, he is the senior program leader of CEEW. Mr. Vivek Suneja could not join us today. And Mr. Samrat Sen Gupta from EKI Energy Services also could not join today for some reason. So instead of him, we have Mr. Rohit Vaklagadda. He is a senior manager of business development at EKI Energy Services. So I welcome you all. Thank you so much for joining us today. So before we get into the question and answers, let me give you a little to our viewers, to attendees, let me give you a little bit of background on the carbon credit system and the carbon credit concept overall. So on April 18, 2023, the European Parliament passed legislation for the implementation of Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, CBAM, as part of the European Union's Green Deal, which aims to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 55% before 2030. While it has been rolled out, it will be rolled out in 4 phases. It will enable the EU to impose carbon border tax on specific imports such as steel, aluminium, fertilizers, electricity, cement, and hydrogen from January 2026 onwards. CBAM is pertaining to applying a fee on the carbon emissions on certain imports, but it has been criticized as a trade restrictive policy, especially by developing countries like India, which has set its own target of being carbon neutral by 2070. So implementation of CBAM holds certain challenges for us. Now, carbon market overall are an important tool for all the economies to reach their global climate goals, and particularly in the short term and the long term. And in order to offer nations and businesses the room to ease the low carbon transition and able to reach net zero emission in the most efficient way possible, carbon credit mobilize resources and save expenses. So by allowing parties to exchange carbon credits produced by the reduction or removal of greenhouse gases from the atmosphere, such as through the switching from fossil fuels to renewable energy, or by increasing or conserving carbon stocks in ecosystem, like afforestation, carbon market, encourages climate action. So, in terms of regulatory requirement, measuring carbon emissions can be the first step for businesses or for the industry, and this would be to set up a greenhouse gas inventory. Firms must be able to measure their emissions and understand their emission profile. The other can be, one of the mechanisms could be that to reduce the emission itself for any businesses, emission reduction opportunities depends on the company's activities itself or sector specific activities, the technology options that they hold, and the emission intensity. To meet reduction targets in a cost-effective manner and make appropriate trading decisions, businesses would benefit from evaluating the various options available to them in different parts of their operations and estimating the cost associated with them. So theoretically, mechanisms have been offered and they have been published. So different formulas have already been offered by the industry experts on how to reduce carbon emissions. However, Indian companies must prepare themselves for the upcoming domestic carbon market to reduce the regulatory business risk in global markets, to stay competitive in the years ahead and play an important role in today's meeting India's climate commitment. So with this, I think we can open our question and answer session. So to begin with, I would request Mr. Vaklagadda to just take us through the evolution and the present status of carbon trade mechanism in India. And according to you, sir, what would be the implication, that is the benefit, the challenges of carbon trade market once it is officially formalized? So if you can just give us a brief about it, sir.
Yeah. Thank you, Archana, and good afternoon to everybody attending this session. And when talking about carbon markets, we all must be aware that through Kyoto Protocol, carbon markets was one of the market-based instruments that has come up, and it has been you can say fairly successful in India, though in its earliest in the phase one. So from 2008 to 12, it was called the Commitment Period 1, and the second period was from 2013 to 2020. And so why 2020 is because Kyoto Protocol was only ratified until 2020, December 2020. So in the first phase, like it was very well, because there was active participation from all the major developed countries, like majorly the European Union. So like we saw a tremendous participation from the Indian companies, so which were the suppliers for carbon credits for various countries in the world. And along with India, even China and few other you can say developing countries have taken huge steps in the registration process. So as of today, India has around 1,670 projects registered in CDM, and around 600 projects registered in the voluntary carbon standards. So this makes it one of the largest, like you can say, one of the top 5 countries, which is going to be a huge supplier for carbon credits in the future as well. And this was totally for the international participation. And after 2013 and until 2020, there was very little participation from the international governments, such as, like you can say, Australia, Canada, and all these major countries have backed out from the Kyoto Protocol. So this made it one of the you can say failures, you can say, in the second phase. So then from then on, the market has been subdued, and then now after Paris Agreement has been finalized, we have started seeing some momentum coming back in the market. And like you can say, in the last 1 year or 2 years, there has been tremendous increase in voluntary participation as well. So international companies have taken steps towards environment sustainability, and taking stock of their carbon footprint, and measures how to reduce carbon. So of this, like major corporates have incorporated carbon credits as one of the tools to reduce their carbon footprint. And so when we come down, narrow down to Indian carbon market, we have not seen much carbon there was no carbon standard as such which was mandated in India. So that is the reason, like there is less awareness in terms of you can say the carbon credits as a subject, and less awareness in terms of carbon reduction. So because the common point, there is no mandate till date. So when we come that is when where the Indian carbon market steps in, and they propose to make some obligations, or put some targets on heavy emitters. So you can say heavy emitters as in the cement industries, or the power sector, or you can say the steel, the metal sector. So these there are going to be some companies which are going to sectors or companies which are going to be obligated, that is going to be formed as part of the compliance sector. And there will be also a provision for opening up a voluntary carbon market in India as well. Right. So to participate voluntary action from apart from compliance, not only compliance actions. And so though I would not say that, like what would be the potential is yet to be seen, because there are no rules or guidelines that have come out. So everything is under consultation right now. Like it is being formed. There have been steps taken to implement the system, and as a foolproof system, because they should not, India as such, what I've seen from the stakeholder consultations or the actions being taken, or the international from the international scenario, they are considering is that they want carbon credits to be additional, you can say they, only from eligible projects, or you can say they have to be there is no other double counting. Like you can say the same credits being supplied in any other scheme or any other form. So it should not be that way. And they're going to be implementing a foolproof monitoring, reporting, and verification system for the obligators, so that they know what is their targets, year on year targets, and how do we reduce them. So this is some of the actions that have been taken up in the Indian carbon market as of date. And and apart from this, like even with the advent of the Paris Agreement, it's slated to start in 2021, but it's been delayed due to delay in negotiations and forming the guidelines. So we are also expecting a buoyant voluntary carbon market internationally as well, apart from India. So yeah, you can say India is going to be Indian projects are going to be you can say going to play a huge role in the international carbon sphere. Thank you.
Right. Because that was going to be my follow-up question as to, what kind of scenario do you see for India? But so my next question is to Mr. Girdhari Lal. The triple bottom line approach is a sustainable framework that measures a business success in three key areas, that is profit, people, and the planet. So how far has it succeeded in India, and how can we ensure its further proliferation and success going forward?
Thanks, Archana, for asking this, and a very good afternoon to everyone, to the panelists and to the attendees out here. So let me first congratulate the DCPI and everyone, the organizers here to take out time and organize this. Coming to the point, see, when we talk about triple balance sheet approach, we are talking about a holistic approach, because typically, if you look at, there are three key elements here: profitability, people, and planet. The other way to look at it is probably we can talk about economic and the financial dimension. We can talk about the social dimension. We can talk about the environmental dimension. The fundamental ask is, are these three divorced or are these three integrated? So in the times that we live in, these are well integrated, and if you have to survive, you'll have to well embrace and then grow along. What it means is, there would be risk, there would be challenges, there would be opportunities. If a corporate has to not only survive, grow, you'll have to embrace triple balanced approach. Some of the, let's say, I'll give you some example. While many corporates have already embraced, they have taken initiative. We do know about energy efficiency measures that are taken. The companies have been focusing on LED lights, smart lights. We keep talking about renewable energy sources, whether it is wind, solar. There are rooftop mounts that are there already installed. There are huge installation which are in pipeline. Likewise, there are a lot of initiatives that we can talk about. The others being, let's say, employees are being encouraged, sensitized that if you are traveling along, or if you can do carpooling, if you can take public transport, and especially I stay in Delhi, that is going everyday growing realization that the concept like carpool, use of public transport are more and more relevant. And when it comes to corporate, I'll still see a lot of corporates doing a hybrid. There's a huge room for us to go digital. We need to invest in our digital assets. We need to integrate. We need not operate in silos. So these are some of the measures where, while the companies are still fast pacing, but there are huge room for us to improve on. When we are constructing a building or a factory, there are a lot of norms which are there which can make it really very smart. We can have those LEED certifications wherein the buildings are sustainable, these are environmental friendly, the energy consumption comes down tremendously. Now I'll come to the key question. If we invest in this kind of measures as a corporate, do we hit on our top line, bottom line profitability? The answer is no. Maybe in the short run, it may be impacted, but in the long run, and if you want to really even in the medium term, it may be a very, very profitable and good avenue for you all, for us. So it means improve financial performance, wherein because you are bringing down your cost significantly, you are enhancing your efficiency, you are making your product and solution sustainable. That enhances the brand value, the positioning of the company enhances big time. And one thing that I want to underline here is it is no more wherein it's a voluntary, it is becoming more of a mandatory requirement. So it's better to embrace it now rather than going into a reactive approach. And it is approached and seen as not only a value statement, your shareholder values would increase tremendously. Your clients, your employees, everything will be enhanced in a big time. You will have more and more of retention and growth. So I'll just quickly move on to some of the examples that we can have. If let's say, what can we do more? If you look at some of the examples, some things that comes to my mind is an example of IOCL. What they have done is, if you look at the turbine oil, initially they used some trucks to carry it and for refilling. Now what they have done is they have innovated, they have those pipelines. So though it may not look very significant, but if you look at the changes that has brought in, they have a huge saving there. There are concepts like network optimization, logistics, supply chain management, and a number of things that are there. If you look at Marigold, what they have done is, through the use of network optimization, they have been able to cut down on their carbon footprint because their delivery time has enhanced, their fuel consumption has gone down. There are likes of companies like Page Industries. What they have done is they are investing in real time assessment, real time monitoring of how much fuel is being consumed by their fleet. If they find that certain truck or certain a segment of their fleet is not very high on efficiency, so they are following, or they are rather scrapping that segment totally. So there are a lot of innovation that is already happening. What I'm trying to impress on everyone out here is, these measures are there, taken by few. We need to embrace and up the ante and build on the momentum. The building norms that I already talked about, another glaring example would be IGI Airport. If you look at, it has come out very, very beautiful. Of course, the footfall has increased tremendously, but the amount of saving, if you talk about from an environmental perspective, it is a wonder. I'll come to the second part, what Archana you asked about the proliferation measures. The key is every stakeholder which is integral to it, whether it is company, employee, we need to embrace it. We need to have this kind of workshop, internal as well as external, wherein these concepts are embraced totally. And then, of course, you need some kind of a nudging, wherein, just to give you an example, there is a national action plan, which the government of India calls it Business Reform Action Plan. So there are areas that are included there every year. And now I am happy that for the past few years, there has been increased focus on environmental and sustainability measures. You would see reforms which are there, which are now tracked throughout the year. These are being probably encouraged by the states and the corporates to adopt, is that you focus on, let's say, registration of refurbishes, the battery rules, the norms that are there are totally adhered to. Apart from it, another thing is, even SEBI has come out with a very good reporting, at least for the top 1,000 listed companies, BRSR. That is business responsibility and sustainability reporting. So with this, I want to probably end is that for the corporates, the triple balance sheet approach is a winner, is a win-win proposition. It should not be seen as a win-lose proposition. It's a winner for everyone. Yes, over to you, Archana. Thanks.
Right, sir. So next question is to Mr. Faisal. Sir, in your opinion, which sectors need to urgently address their carbon emissions and why?
Thank you, Archana. Good afternoon, all. So let me answer this question here. The sectors which urgently needs to be addressed in the carbon emission industry is like mainly the transportation sector, energy and power sector, industry, manufacturing, their forestry, agriculture, and land usage part of it, and some kind of a civil as well, where construction is getting involved in building and construction segment. So if you just look into the the later part of it, the building and construction, as Girdharilal also has mentioned, is a civil construction, building construction is a significant contributor to the emission through these energy consumptions, because the material production has a higher rate of emissions compared to the other industries in these industry. And emphasizing the energy efficiency buildings, like going for green building certificates and sustainable constructions using the material, sustainable material, can make a significant impact on this. So in the similar context, if you just look into the other industries like industrial manufacturing, specifically the big industries like the cement industry, steel industry, chemicals have a substantial carbon footprints as well. And implementing process to refine the low carbon footprints and implementing the cleaner procedures, technologies, promoting circular economy definitely would add a lot of value to this. And also adopting for the energy efficiency processes within the organization would definitely give a more contribution towards the net neutrality or the net zero part of it. Then coming to the transportation part of the industry, this is also a major source for carbon emission, primarily from the use of their fossil fuel powered vehicles. And usually we recommend to encourage the adoption of electrical vehicles, promoting public transportations, and investing in substantial infrastructures would be really essential over there in transportation industry. Next, we have the agriculture, forest, and land usage part of it. Agriculture practices needs to be refined to an extent, and including the deforestation, methane emissions from livestock, and synthetic fertilizers use, so contributes to a carbon emissions here. So sustainable farming techniques needs to be adopted, reforestation efforts need to be adopted, and carbon sequestration in the soil can help address these issues. So we should bring in an awareness of how the carbon sequestration within the in agriculture industry. This needs to be concerned there, addressed there. Okay. So I guess like the next industry would be the energy power industry. So transition to the renewable energies, definitely there's a lot happening in this industry, even which we have witnessed it. Specifically, there's a kind of a mixed proportionate usage of industry, wherein like the raw power, what we use from the normal source and the renewable combination is getting split into the percentages, because the power, energy and power transition to the renewable energy sources and increase in energy efficiency is crucial in reducing carbon emissions. So the energy sector is a significant contributor to greenhouse gas emissions due to the reliance on the fossil fuels. So a lot of concern is there's a lot of concern over here in the energy and the power segment, and there's a kind of this is an industry where needs a kind of an address urgently addressed to this. Yeah, Archana, anything else?
Right. So my next question is to Professor Sirajuddin. So on the technological aspects, the upgradation hasn't maybe reached almost different industry segments. So, what would you say on the need of technological interventions which is required in carbon emitting industries?
Hello. Am I audible?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. You're audible.
So thank you, Archana, for providing this opportunity, and it's certainly a very wonderful topic to discuss. As the learner panelist has already talked about the various sectors where this approach can be used power, industry, building, transportation, agriculture, and forestry. And why the reason is that why we are today discussing is again something which is not a fashionable talk, but rather that's a need of the hour. Where if suppose by 2070 net zero scenario is not met, then the rise of the temperature would be much higher. That's even if it is met, then again it is expected that it would be around plus 2 degrees centigrade. And so this carbon trading I took as a golden opportunity, especially for India, because if you look in India, most of the polluted in terms of the air polluted cities are you can found in the Indian subcontinent, and certainly Delhi, NCR, and all those things. And carbon emission.
So your audio is getting disrupted, Professor Sirajuddin.
The video is frozen there, Archana.
Yeah.
Shift to the next speaker for now, then.
Yeah.
Okay, I think he's back. So you're on mute, please. Please unmute yourself.
Professor Ahmed, you may switch off your audio.
Hello. Okay. So there is a huge opportunity to use the green fuel. For example, in a GREHA, or when we talk about the building construction, there is a set guide rules that you have to generate at least 2% of the electricity through solar panels or non-conventional energy. And but unfortunately, till date, there is nothing such for industries which has a sufficient area which can be used for the harvesting of the green energy. So this is some sort of a policy plus technology interventions would help not only in reducing the carbon emission, but also in trading the carbon emission and getting more. So in industries, there is a huge opportunities to use the at least 10% of the total energy that can be generated at a micro level or a smaller level, and that would be a green. In some cases, in the major industries, for example, power, cement, steel, chemicals, which are major contributors of the carbon. So they can equally invest in a solar. If solar is not available, the sufficient area is not available, then they could make a part of the. They can invest in a wind turbine, wind energy, and it has been done. For example, I just shared you one small example during the water harvesting, rainwater harvesting. Central Groundwater Board wants that all the industries should have a sufficient large numbers of the ponds where the water can be retained and harvested. But some industries does not have that much land, so they were supposed to maintain nearby village ponds. They have to adopt and harvest the water. So similarly, on a similar pattern, we for a green energy, suppose if we don't have a sufficient area to generate our micro level green energy, then an investment could be made in industries need to make an investment in a small hydro plant or wind energy plant. So the basic objective, either go into the building or transportation, is that the more we can use the green energy, obviously the carbon credit will increase, the chances of the trading off will increase, and that would bring the money. But that's more important for me being an environmental engineer, is that will help us in reducing the carbon emission. And unfortunately, we don't have a much incentive in India for reducing the carbon emissions. So any industries, if they whatever they do it by their own internal policies. So government incentives were lacking, which will come through this carbon trading. And then there's a few things that would be required apart from the technology. Is the incentive for high energy equipments which are used for the household tables and industries. For example, government should come up with a policy for certain incentives in terms of the cost of a 5-star rating equipments which are being used, either it is AC or any equipment that's being used. So, but still it lacks that. Okay, so what if somebody buys it? He buys it because of the low consumption of the energy. That's an internal incentive, but the government should also should step in there. Then the other thing which I feel is that it's a micro or domestic level clean energy generation will be a big step towards it. So when we call about the domestic level, means that at a household level or micro level, means that steel industry. For example, my institution from where we come, Jamia, we are generating around 16% of the total our energy through solar panels, which is a quite huge as compared to the existing government norms. And so these are the few things that can be done at the policy level, but certainly a huge investment in research is required. For example, in a carbon capturing, hydrogen as a source of a heat, that's an area is still unexplored. And so this is the area where a huge government support in terms of the research at higher levels would be required, where the hydrogen as a source of a heat can be, or as a source of energy, it can be used and produced there. And the second thing is that required government attentions and researchers is that carbon capturing. So these two are the area that will not only help us to generate a good market for carbon trading, but also these two things will help us to make our cities clean and breathable.
Right, sir. Right, sir. Tarun, my next question is to you. So industry segments such as coal, cement, these are some of the largest emitters of greenhouse gases. So our dependency on them is unlikely to reduce also in the coming years. So how is your organization working towards making the process of carbon emissions, it's reduced? So how are you making those products which are usually the polluters, making them more environmentally friendly or less carbon emitters?
Thank you for the question, Archana. Yeah, unfortunately, India and a lot of other countries are coal hungry. And 45% of the world's emissions, unfortunately, come from buildings. But fortunately for everyone, I think, I'm in this space and I'm trying to solve the problem. A little background about me first. I think the answer to the question also lies in my background. So I'm the founder of this company called Green Jams. We basically make the world's first verified carbon negative concrete. It's called Agrocrete. It's made from crop residues and the byproducts of the steel and power industries. So, at this point, we have Agrocrete in the form of construction blocks, but in the future, we would also introduce this as a replacement for structural concrete. So, what we're essentially able to do is take the biogenic carbon, which is stored in the crop residues. We take that and we mineralize it using a revolutionary new binder that we've created. And that's how we're creating a stone out of it, much like concrete. And the stone is then used to make buildings. So there are quite a few interesting pathways, right, for decarbonizing several hard to abate industries. Recently, IIT Kanpur also had published a research about how electric vehicles are not the answer. I think this debate will go on forever. Until I don't know. I think maybe until we run the planet to the ground. But the need for action is definitely there right away. And I don't know. About in around 2016, there was this amazing article. A lot of newspapers, literally everyone around the world, had covered this. For the first time, scientists were able to melt steel using a solar furnace. And I'm extremely excited about the carbon border tags, primarily for the reason that despite the basic countries essentially protesting this new implementation, I do feel like it's a boon for literally everyone of us working in the climate industry, simply because now we have the tools. Now we get visibility for the tools that we've developed, and that would consequently help us bring them to market, make sure that we're able to abate these emissions. But here's a key aspect. Despite all of these technologies, right? I mean, we're way beyond carbon reduction. What we need right now is carbon removal. And for carbon removal to happen, the only viable pathway is mineralization. And that's what I think every one of us needs to put our focus on. And the unfortunate thing is, topics like mineralization and carbon capture and the multiple pathways through which this can happen is actually very it's not popular at all. And I think it's all of our responsibilities to make sure that the world essentially gets to know that there's something like this which exists, and that it needs to get implemented, and that all those trillions of dollars basically need to go flow into these sort of technologies.
My next question is to Arjun Dutt. What lessons do existing Indian carbon markets, particularly the renewable energy certificate mechanisms, offer for the development of the proposed carbon credit trading system?
Thank you, Archana. Excellent question. As India, works towards setting up a national carbon market under the carbon credit trading scheme, I think there can be lessons that can be lessons from existing sectoral carbon markets, like the one you pointed out, the Renewable Energy Certificate Scheme, or the PAT scheme that is there for the decarbonization of industry. Lessons from those mechanisms can inform the implementation of the new carbon market. And I want to particularly talk about the demand side, because for any market, the viability of any carbon market, depends heavily upon the demand for carbon credits. So I want to talk about the lessons that we can learn from the demand for renewable energy certificates, the mechanism that you pointed to in your question. So under the Renewable Energy Certificate Scheme, primarily distribution utilities and large industrial consumers are required to, or they're obligated to purchase renewable energy, or renewable energy is expected to account for a minimum proportion of their electricity purchases. And to the extent that they're unable to make up for in actual physical purchases, they are to purchase certificates from the REC market to make up for it. Now, what we've seen from the actual performance of the market is, first sort of point I'd like to make is the difference between the demand from obligated entities and non-obligated entities. And why this is important is because, as Rohit pointed out in his remarks at the very outset, that the carbon credit trading scheme will have two kinds of participants. There'll be one set of participants that will be obligated, that will be part of a compliance mechanism, and then there'll be another set of participants that will be voluntary. They can buy and sell credits without any obligation under any specific regulation. Now, what we actually saw in the REC mechanism was that obligated entities accounted for almost the entirety of the purchases. So Discoms and industrial consumers, captive open access users, more than 99% of the demand was from obligated entities, and only less than 1% was from voluntary buyers. So when we are talking about generating demand for a new carbon market, we can only rely for a limited amount on voluntary buyers. Though many companies have, committed to decarbonizing themselves, but from the perspective of generating viable demand, there should be greater reliance on the obligated entities. That's the first lesson that I would sort of point towards. The second is, even if we look at obligated buyers under the REC mechanism, there's a difference between what their actual what they were actually expected to purchase or comply with in terms of actual renewable energy purchases and what they ended up doing. So there was a difference between where the demand should have been and actual demand. And why was that? The reason is actually enforcement. Now, let me sort of give you a bit more context about this through a specific example. So consider the year, financial year 2020. In this case, a number of distribution utilities or DISCOMs were actually under compliant or actually had considerable shortfall with obligations. So as per renewable purchase obligations for DISCOMs, if we were to look at their obligations, as per CEW analysis, DISCOMs in India were short in terms of their obligations to the tune of around 72 million RECs. So if they had purchased 72 million RECs in financial year 2020, they would have then been compliant with their obligations. In reality, they purchased only about 5 million RECs. So they undercomplied by about 67 million credits or RECs. To put this into perspective, the total number of RECs issued over a 10-year period, financial year 2011 to 2020, was around 70 million RECs. So the undercompliance in 1 year would have required all the RECs issued over 10 years to make up for it. And the reason why they did not was because enforcement mechanisms were not stringent enough to get the obligated entities to comply. So had that been there, the REC mechanism itself would have been a much more vibrant market. But the lesson that this presents for the new CCTS is that while certain obligated entities will sort of form the bedrock of the demand, the enforcement mechanisms to actually enforce these obligations should be stringent enough, else there could again be a faltering of demand, as we saw in certain years of the REC market. And then that can affect the viability of the new CCTS. So ensuring enforcement of obligation is important for obligated entities. And the last sort of lesson that I'd like to point towards is actually when we talk about obligated entities, they're given certain emissions trajectories that they have to adhere to. And it's important to make sure that the obligations or emissions trajectories that obligated entities have to comply with, these correspond closely to market realities. Now, in terms of the RPO obligations of DISCOMs, the central government has actually made a modification, and that's actually very, very constructive. The changes to the RPO trajectory proposed by Ministry of Power are actually quite constructive in this regard. Let me explain why. So if we look at before the recent change to RPO obligations in I think in 2022, the previous guidance for RPO RPO trajectory given by the Ministry of Finance to states between financial year 19 and 22 was to have purchases of renewable energy accounting for 19% in around, or 17% in 2019, rising to around 22% by financial year 22. Now, this trajectory excluded purchase of hydro. So if we were to look at this figure, 22%, purchase or around 21%, 22% purchases in financial year 22, that was the requirement of the trajectory. Actual non-hydro RE generation in the country is around 11.8% of the electricity injected into the grid. So this is an example of how the trajectory itself was not in line with the actual electricity generated in the country, non-hydro RE generated. And therefore, we saw that when this guidance was adopted by state electricity regulatory corporations, the trajectory was considerably watered down, for the DISCOMs. But now, when we fast forward to the latest changes presented by the Ministry of Power, they're actually quite constructive and in line with the generation in the country. So now the new RPO obligations or the guidance given by Ministry of Power is that RPO includes hydro, and the obligation for financial year 23 is around 24%. Now, this is actually quite close to the generation of renewables if we include hydro. So non-hydro renewables is around 12% of electricity generated, and hydro is another 11%. So around 23-24% of electricity in the grid is actually low carbon. And this actually is quite consistent with the guidance given by RPO trajectory of the Ministry of Power. So this is an example of how obligations can be made, aligned with market realities. And if they are, that will make the compliance that much more feasible for obligated entities and result in a viable market. So I think these very important lessons that can be drawn from existing sectoral carbon markets, if implemented in the, or if applied and adapted to the CCTS, proposed CCTS, it can result in a viable market and a vibrant market that is important to the decarbonization of India's economy. Thank you.
Thanks, Arjun sir. So, sir, coming to Professor Sirajuddin, you had mentioned that there are no lack of incentives when it comes to reducing the carbon emissions. There's also the issue of poor research and development infrastructure, which is there in India, because manufacturing units in India, whether it's medium, large scale or small, they will continue to emit carbon to an extent till the time they have poor technology in their hands. So, what kind of technological research and development do you think intervention is required for these manufacturing units to begin their journey of carbon reduction? Professor Sirajuddin? I think there's some connectivity issue. Okay. So I'll come to Rohit. So how can Indian companies monetize carbon trading within the domestic market if and when the mechanism is put in place?
This is some question which everybody would be interested, I believe. Yeah. So there are two entities, like one who is the polluter or the penalized, and the one who is going to be who has to be penalized, and two is the one who has taken up initiatives to reduce their emissions more than what is being expected from them. So let's say everybody is every obligated entity is when we talk about a compliance market. So when everybody is given a target, and there might be some very good environment conscious organizations who have exceeded their goals, the stepwise targets. So in this sense, the excess of what is being required from them, so it can be traded to someone who is not been able to fulfill those fulfill their targets, like the expected emission reductions or the energy intensity specific in set parameters. So they can then like trade their emission reductions to some company which has not been able to meet their targets. So in this sense, like the one like I mentioned, there should be a stringent monitoring, reporting, and verification process. So the need of the protocol, need of such protocol is important for this trade to happen. So unless the monitoring is done properly, we cannot get the actual you can say correct numbers. So then I guess there's going to be a trade platforms coming up. So either the IEX or the Bureau of Energy Efficiency can come up with are likely to come up with a trading platform as well on the lines of REC trade. So if that sort of mechanism comes up, then it is going to be giving a good picture of how the trade would happen, and you're going to remove all the bottlenecks for approaching the trader. Like you can say each companies, like everybody can list their certificates in the platform, and if that sort of thing happens, then yeah, you might see a lot of demand, and you can say when for the companies to monetize, so there should also be an like this side penalizing mechanism as well. So unless and until you don't start penalizing people in India, that's the scenario right now. So unless and until there's no compulsion, the targets won't be met. So if the targets are to be met, then the trade would happen significantly. So that is how a Indian company can gain revenue. Or else, like you also any day, if any projects which are not covered under the Indian carbon market, so if there is eligibility for them in the Paris Agreement or in the Article 6 trading mechanisms, so it's going to be another option for them apart from the Indian carbon market.
Tarun, I believe you have to go to some other engagements. So I'll ask you the question. So what are some of the technological challenges in India pertaining to production of sustainable elements of sustainable materials? And what kind of government support would you propose is required in this field?
I'm not sure I would actually propose any government support, because I'm a strong believer of the adage that ask the country what you can give and not what the country can give to you. I'm a big supporter of voluntary action, and therefore, I mean, so it's a challenge not just in the world, not just in India, but all across the world, where, like I said, again, hard to abate industries still find challenges when it comes to the sort of materials that are used. I guess the fundamental focus right now should be on bringing out technologies that have been in the lab for a very long time or have been ignored, and start looking at ways that we can modernize current manufacturing methods and technologies, so that we're able to concentrate on the principles of circular economy and so on. But at the end of the day, it would eventually come down to thinking a little beyond profits alone, and that basically would be my key insight.
Thanks, Tarun. Thanks for your input, and thank you for joining us today. So my next question is to Mr. Girdhari Lal. So the concept of green finance and green deposits is evolving. So how can these provisions help companies lower their carbon emissions?
Thanks, Archana. Again, an excellent question. So if you look at green finance, we need to really understand that it's a broad connotation. It refers to all sorts of financing that are meant for environmental friendly or sustainable projects. Now, what could be the sources of finance or green finance, as we call it? So if you look at it, there has been genesis worldwide. In fact, World Bank initiated after the Paris Agreement in 2007. There were bonds which were issued, and a lot of economies and governments followed suit. Even in India, we have a good number of corporate bonds being issued. So there are some fundamental things that we need to essentially take care of. One, the use of proceeds, because if you are saying that you are going to have these bonds meant for financing green projects, so the use of proceeds has to be well taken care of. There has to be a complete transparency in the process, in terms of how you manage the entire process. The reporting has to be adequate. You'll have to have those checks and balances in place. Some of the bonds that I can quickly talk about is it could have different kind of exposure. Mostly it is the sector exposure. It could be like you have NTPC, IREDA, you have Yes Bank. You also have now the exposure to the building sector, like PNB Housing Finance. It has launched a bond. from a categorization perspective, it could well be an asset-backed bond, it could be a hybrid, or it could be a sovereign bond. So that's just essentially one type of instrument. You could have many other forms or many other instruments. You can have green term deposits. You can have green loans, which are the norms now. You will see that RBI has been releasing framework and guidelines now for financing such projects. It do qualify as a priority sector lending. So a part of the corpus is earmarked for such projects. So the government and agencies are committed to ensure that yes, we are aware. And if you go by the estimate, it is well estimated that $1 trillion US dollar investment would be required if India has to achieve its target of zero carbon neutrality by 2070. And where does it come from? It has to be a mix. It cannot be one sources of fund. So where and happy to share that a lot of good start has made it. For instance, if you talk about the battery storage, you will see that viability gap funding is there available now. And if you are to achieve those targets, so of course there has to be a mix. And it's not only one area that we need to support. You will have incentivization, you will have various kind of a subsidy being given, but at the same time, what I started in my last address, what I was saying is it's essentially the corporate which has to come through, realize that this is something which we are doing for the larger good and also for us. It's not that we are voluntarily doing which is benefiting, it is benefiting us all. So like National Green Hydrogen Mission, if you look at the corpus that is committed there, it is over 19,000 crores that are there. I'm not saying that it is enough, but I'm saying that it's a good start. So net there are these regulatory norms which are there, which are evolving. We need to fast pace it, ensure that there is enough flexibility and room. And the things like ESG norms, ESG is well integrated now. If you have to have a project which you want to make sustainable, so environmental sustainability and governance, these elements are embedded now. Unless and until you embed it into your project, in your feasibility report, in your sustainability report, the sponsors of the projects, if you approach any funding houses, they would say that no, we are not funding you. Most likely, there may be exception, but I'm saying that most likely these are now embedded, because it's a realization now that any project which is to sustain has to have these essential elements. So coming back to your moot question, that how should the companies leverage? One, if you have internal sources of finance, great. Otherwise, you should provision wherein you should. It's like if you want to be relevant, you invest in R&D, you invest in your solutions. So the appeal to every corporate out here is that it's an investment in your own sustainability. So you use your internal sources of finance, as well as there are government and various agencies which are supporting, so we should be available. And the other norms which have been discussed by the fellow panelists, so they have already, I will not be getting into the details of those, but yes, there are these avenues which are there, and it's a mix set of instruments that are to be working if we have to be sustainable and achieving our targets. So thank you. Back to you, Archana.
Thanks, sir. So next question is to Mr. Khaisar. There is lack of awareness which is clearly there amongst the entrepreneurs, the manufacturers. So carbon offsetting is presumed to be a complicated or maybe a time-consuming aspect. So how can Indian companies leverage this mechanism and seek out economical solutions to reduce their emissions?
Thanks, Archana. Thanks again. Definitely, there's a big challenge here. Specifically, the carbon offsetting is usually considered to be complicated and time-consuming because of a lot of factors, which I personally believe specifically with respect to the methodologies, measurements, verification processes, and third party getting verified or involved in it. Let me keep my answer very specific and precise, taking time into considerations here. Also, the market complexity, where the market complexity involves different stakeholders, the project developers, brokers, buyers, and also the reporting compliances as well, you know. So if you just overall look into it, right from your measurement verification to your calculation methodologies like CDM, VCS, project selections, and more technicality like additionality and preferences, you know. So definitely looking into all this, there's a feel that carbon offset is considered as a complicated and time-consuming for these projects. And specifically answering it to the Indian companies, how they can reduce the carbon intensity in their production services by basically following a thumb rule or basic corrections by adopting energy efficiencies, optimizing their supply chain, and embracing their renewable energies, and also investing into the low carbon technologies, engaging employees and stakeholders as has been discussed regarding the awarenesses, how to correct their process internally and how to bring in the delta in their process. And also the measure would be the adaptation or adopting of the renewable energy and measures, embracing the renewable energies. These would be the primary corrections which usually the companies can bring into their products and services.
So coming to Mr. Arjun Dutt, so what are the key considerations of India in engaging with international carbon market under Article 6 of the Paris Agreement?
Thank you, Archana. So I think your question had two parts. First, I think it's important to understand the international carbon markets, because of course we've been talking about the domestic CCTS, but fellow panelists have alluded to the possibility of connecting with various international markets. So of course, while a domestic carbon market is a useful policy lever to help India become a low carbon economy, connecting with international carbon markets has the added advantage of mobilizing new sources of capital that are otherwise not flowing to India's energy transition. So, for example, if we are able to make the CCTS interoperable with other major emissions trading schemes. So the EU ETS was a major cap and trade scheme mentioned by one of the other panelists. So if credits generated by India's CCTS are eligible for participation or interoperable with the EU ETS, it can help draw in capital from the EU through that particular route. So that is why, participation with international markets, is important. But coming further, talking about Article 6. So Article 6, very briefly, just for some brief context, Article 6 is about voluntary cooperation between countries to enable greater ambition in climate action, both mitigation and adaptation. Now, as per some estimates by the International Emissions Trading Association, in case there is cooperation for voluntary cooperation through Article 6 for joint NDC implementation, that can result in savings of up to $300 billion per year by 2030 versus a scenario of independent implementation of NDCs by countries. So that is the potential benefit, why it is important to consider international markets, and particularly Article 6 in this case. So Article 6 very broadly comprises Article 6.2, which is cooperation between countries for shifting for transfer of emission abatement directly between countries, either through bilateral or multilateral approaches. Then there is a centralized market mechanism under Article 6.4 and non-market approaches under 6.8. Now, while the principles governing Article 6 were agreed at Glasgow at COP26, the infrastructure and institutional arrangements are still works in progress. So these markets are not fully operationalized. But while we're waiting for them to be operationalized, one key consideration for countries such as India for all countries rather, including India, is selecting the specific sectors that are to participate in these markets, because each country, the designated national authority in each country, has the remit to select which sectors should participate. So from the perspective of mobilizing international finance, I think it is important for India to focus on sectors that are expensive to decarbonize and are financially underserved, to help mobilize capital for that. In fact, earlier this year, India's policy establishment announced the specific sectors that they will consider as eligible under Article 6.2. And this particular approach seems to have been followed, because the list includes sectors, emerging technologies such as green hydrogen, offshore wind, which is not quite commercially viable, CCUS, which is again not commercially viable, and new materials such as green ammonia. So the idea is, and including others, of course, there are other sectors as well, but generally the approach seems to be that sectors that are more expensive to decarbonize and otherwise lack commercial viability, Article 6 markets, or 6.2 in this case, can be an attractive, can potentially be a route to channel capital that can make some of these applications more commercially viable. So I think that is an important sort of consideration. And of course, as the markets become close to operational, of course, India will have to also select specific sectors for 6.4, and then also give more granularity in terms of the specific vintage of credits that would be eligible under the specific sectors under both 6.2 and 6.4. So all of these, and of course, setting up the infrastructure, the registries, etc., that are necessary to participate in these markets, India, of course, will do as the market itself comes close to operationalization. All of this would be necessary to engage with these markets, but there are clearly some benefits that can be unlocked that can, accelerate India's transition to a low carbon economy.
Right. I just have one last question to Mr. Rohit. Sir, there may be some companies which will, invest into projects which are decades old to lower, for carbon credits. So, on one hand, they will be generating excessive carbon, whereas on the other hand, they'll be investing into projects. So it's into projects, which are environmental friendly or sustainable. So, what future do you see for this legacy of carbon credit system? Because on one hand, you're polluting, on the other hand, you're investing into something. So technically, nothing is getting reduced. It's still getting balanced out, and we have to reduce the carbon emissions to a greater extent.
So your point is right. Like since carbon credits have always been a mode of compensation rather than reducing for compensation for what you have been generating. So we will need to invest in some efficient technologies to reduce our emissions, which would contribute to absolute reduction in emissions. So that is when we can come to a target called net zero. So which is absolute reduction, like zero carbon emissions at actual. So so we can reduce we can invest in technologies like CCUS, which are some which we are seeing some good projects as well. So I guess Mr. Tarun, he was working on concrete. So so we are getting projects on zero carbon concrete as well, or you can say technological carbon removal. So that's a new carbon credit market that is being booming in the European Union right now. So apart from that, you can say you can also invest in biochar. So that is something which is a carbon sequestration, which has a carbon sequestration potential. So so we can obviously the way out for the companies or the corporate should be that they should optimize their processes, try to reduce as much as possible, and invest in technologically sustainable technologies for future carbon reductions.
Right. Thank you so much for your inputs. So I think my takeaway would be that, as Mr. Girdharajalal had mentioned, that invest in your own sustainability. The mechanism is still under deliberation. Submissions have been given. The suggestions have been given. And with due time and process, it will be put in place. So as of now, the companies have to awaken and, put in their own mechanisms. So thank you so much to all our panelists for joining us today and sharing your inputs. And thank you to all our attendees as well. If you have any questions to us that you would like to ask our panelists, please mail me at archana.rao@tpci.in and we'll take it further. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you for joining. Please take care.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.